Yes.
Okay. Please. Well, my name is Raymond Douglas Chong, Zheng Weiming, and this is the Zhang Clan Odyssey on Go Mountain. Go Mountain means America, the land of gold, Gamsum in Cantonese. And what you see is Go Mountain, America. That's the perception, the reality of how people overseas perceive America is, the mountain of gold. And my name, again, is Raymond Douglas Chong, Zheng Weiming. And I'm a 6th generation American Chinese. And my roots in China goes far back to 158 generations to Hongdi, the Yellow Emperor, to 2710 BC. I have a whole line of my male forefathers, 158 generations. I have a long tree, a family tree, to the Yellow Emperor. And I have this website called the Zhang Clan Odyssey that covers a part of my family history, both in China and in America. And it was developed through my China roots in Beijing. They have a website that has my chronicles, my ancestral line, dating back to around 500 AD. But my family includes honorable civil servants in China, village leaders and peacemakers in China, but mainly for this particular speech, the sojourners to America, Gamsum, Chen Zheng, Bunyan Cheng, Hoi Ling Cheng, Moi Cheng, Jim Sui Chong. 5 generations, over 100 plus years, they came to America, Go Mountain. And within this site, it has the chronicles dating back to 420 AD, going forward to now. It has my ancestral line, focusing more currently on my 5 generations before me, to the Zhang Clan Odyssey, with my China roots in Beijing. And my roots is in Guangdong, in Hoi Ping, in the Pearl River Delta, near Hong Kong, near Macau, in the 4-county area called Sayap. My home county is Hoi Ping, in the Old Cantonese, or Kai Ping. So my roots is Hoi Ping. My forefathers come from a place called Yulunggong Village, or Village of Dragon Hill, near the Tanjing, the Tan River. And it's known for the Dai Lo, the castle in the sky to the left. And what you see is an overview of my village. And across in the background is the mountains of the 8 immortals crossing the sea. So this is my village in Hoi Ping. And these are my people, my relatives, my uncles, aunts, cousins, nephews, nieces in Yulunggong. And to the right is our ancestral hall, where our village was founded in 1506 AD. 1506 AD. This is my village, Village of Dragon Hill. Now we're here to talk about my odyssey of my family in America. I have 7 generations on Go Mountain. To the right, the first one is my great-great-great-grandfather, Chen Zheng, who was born in 1814, first generation. Second generation, Bunyan Cheng, my great-great-grandfather, who was born in 1840. Third one, my great-grandfather, Raymond Chong, who was born in 1865. Fourth generation, My Chong, my grandfather, born in 1892. Generation 5, my father, Jim Sui Chong, born in 1922. Generation 6, myself, Raymond Douglas Chong, and my brother, I believe called Silo, younger brother, or baby brother, Michael George Chong. And this is generation 6. And my son, my number one son, Mangodoi, generation 7, Kinji Kyle Chong. And our history in America starts from 1849 to now, covering 172 years. And what you see to the left is our timeline, the first arrival to the passage of time, and about our 7 generations, both in America and in China, over the past 172 years, from the Qing Dynasty, the Republic of China, the People's Republic of China, and in parallel, what happened in America during the 172 years. Generation 1, Chen Shenzhen, my great-great-grandfather, a gold miner. And that was during the early days of the California gold rush in 1849. Gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in the Sacramento Valley in 1848. All across the world, Americans, Europeans, Hispanics, Asians, in particular Chinese, went to Gold Mountain. And for us Chinese, to the fourth port city known as San Francisco. And you see a picture of the port of San Francisco around 1850. That was when my Chen Zhenzheng, my great-great-grandfather, arrived in Gamsum, Gold Mountain, around 1849. And where they were looking for gold, specks of gold, from the Sierra Nevada gold fields, from the foothills, from the rivers, and further north, at the Northern California gold fields, where all the Chinese among the Americans, Europeans, span across the wilderness of the New West, the American West, in 1849 to 1850, through the Sacramento River. And this is a picture of a Chinese panning for gold in 1852. And that could be my great-great-grandfather panning for gold. But he had to compete against everybody else, the white gold miners, for territory, for stake for mining of gold. And you can see at that time, Chinese were part of the mainstream immigrants, accepted. But as gold became scarce, there were fights, battles for gold fields across California. Eventually, my great-great-grandfather went back to China to next, generation 2, Bunyan Chung. He was my great-great-grandfather. And he came to join to the port of San Francisco in 1865 on a clipper boat from Hong Kong to San Francisco, the first city of arrival. This is a picture what it would look like in San Francisco in 1865. And he came to build the first transcontinental railroad from 1865 to 1869, from California to Nevada to Utah. From San Francisco, he went to the second city, to Sacramento. And that's where he joined the Army of Canton, the 12,000 Chinese who became the major workforce to build the Transcontinental Railroad for the Central Pacific Railroad from 1865 to 1869. And what you see here is a map of the route. From San Francisco, he arrived, took a boat up to Sacramento, and joined the Army of Canton to proceed on the Central Pacific Railroad 690 miles across the Sierra Nevada to the Great Basin in the desert to Promontory Summit, where they met the Union Pacific Railroad coming from Council Bluff, Nebraska, coming eastward to meet at Promontory Summit. And from there, if I can move that screen, I want to move that screen. I don't know why it's there. What you see is a profile and plan of the route from an elevation of 40 feet, 90 miles up to roughly 7,000 feet. They had to build the railroad for 90 miles. From there, from the top near Dunner Summit, they went across roughly 600 miles through the Great Basin, to the desert. And what the challenges they had to go through, they had to go through rocky clay, dig a gouge roughly 63 feet deep, 800 feet long, to break through from Sacramento to Auburn. They had to build a ledge along the slope of the Sierra Nevada, and below them at the place called Cape Horn. And 1,000 feet below them was the American River. So that was the Cape Horn. Dutch Flat. They had to build 50 miles of a wagon road to make sure they provided supply across the logistics to build the railroad. They had to go through Summit Tunnel. They had to build 15 tunnels to solid granite, roughly 600, 200 feet of sandy granite blasted with dynamite and so forth to break through, to get across to Dunner Summit. And from the Great Basin, once they make their breakthrough from the Summit Tunnel, they rush 600 miles to meet with Union Pacific Railroad, the Army of Canton to the Central Pacific Railroad to meet Union Pacific Railroad on the other side. And imagine during the peak of the summer, 120 degrees. At the same time, there are Indians around. And they met, finally, on May 10th, 1869, at Promontory Summit in Utah, near the Great Salt Lake. That was May 10th, 1869. 150 years later, there was a celebration on May 10th, 2019, at Promontory Summit in Utah. And this picture was taken by our recently departed Corky Lee. This is 150 years. The contrast, there were no Chinese in this picture. 150 years, you see Chinese being recognized. And right here, you see that little guy right there? That's me, representing my great-great-grandfather, Raymond Chong, 150 years later, on May 10th, 2019. Next generation, Generation 3, Raymond Chong, my great-grandfather. And to the right, that guy, that 2-year-old boy, that is my father, Jim Sui Chong. This picture was taken around 1924. He came to Boston Chinatown, Raymond Chong, in 1891 and stayed until 1926. And this is what Boston Chinatown looked during the late 19th century, early 20th century. Very compact. Boston was very crowded, lively commerce, trade, business. We had Spring Festival, the annual tradition, Spring Festival, Autumn Festival, Chinese foods, gathering of Chinese, brothers and sisters. And this gambling was a popular pastime because there were no women allowed because of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. There were many single men. It was a society of bachelors. There's also opium den. And because of those two vices, gambling and opium, Raymond Chong, my great-grandfather, he was a successful merchant, both in gambling and opium, very successful. During that time, they had to deal with the Tong Wars. The Oolong Tong is one rival versus the Hip Sun Tong. From the late 19th century to the 1920s, there were Tong Wars across America, from the West Coast to the East Coast. The Oolong Tong was strong on the East Coast. The Hip Sun Tong were strong on the West Coast. And there were murders, extortions, battles all across the major cities where there were Chinatowns in America. Next generation, Generation 4, Moy Chung, my grandfather. He was born in 1892. He arrived in San Francisco Harbor on July 17, 1912, aboard the SS Mongolia. And this is a picture of what the port of San Francisco looked like in 1912. And at that time, all Chinese had to go through an interrogation because of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. They had to go to the Angel Island immigration station where they had to be interrogated. They had to go through health checks. They had to prove that they had a valid reason to study, to live, to be a merchant, to be in America. And most of the immigrants, most Chinese immigrants were men. Very few women, very few children at that time, around 1912. So from 1912 to 1917, Moy Chung, my grandfather, lived in San Francisco Chinatown. And this is a picture of what Chinatown looked like after the great earthquake of 1906. And that was when the records were destroyed, and that gave an opportunity for many Chinese to be claimed that they were residents of America, maybe they were naturalized. So the 1906 great earthquake of San Francisco gave an opportunity for Chinese to come to Gold Mountain.
Sorry, Raymond, is this the marks on screens? Is the annotation or something?
That's not mine. That's somebody else annotation.
Okay. All right.
Should I undo it? Yeah, I think I should undo it, huh? It's not me.
Okay. Okay. Please continue.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's beyond my control.
Adam, can we fix it? Can we fix this yellow box?
I don't know which feature. Someone said I can do something as a host, erase the lines, but anybody know what feature that I?
熊群兵要问熊群兵，熊群兵是 technical 的主管。
Okay, I'm trying to move to the next slide, so I'm stuck. Sorry about that. I'm trying to move to the next slide.
Who has the right to mark? I see a mark. I see a small mark on the screen.
Okay, I think I'm gonna, yeah,
Adam,
maybe I should just allow one participant to share the screen and then transfer to Raymond, because right, everybody can share their screen. Yeah, it's
Adam, check your whiteboard.
Okay. That's what I can do. I believe one participant can share at a time. It's either
okay,
like
shoot.
Did you see this on your whiteboard?
And I can't move my slides right now either.
let me see who can share.
I better stop sharing and then start over again.
Adam, you
on that slide,
on
okay?
the whiteboard to clear everything.
Yeah, I'll start over again.
Okay.
And then
Right now it's okay without sharing.
Okay, then I'll start again.
Okay. Sorry
Jim?
about that.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, okay. Wonderful. It's all gone. So moving on to the next slide. He, for 5 years, stayed at this place called the Chong Company. And it was on 658 Grant Avenue. And it was a dry goods store selling merchandise, clothes, dry fruits, dry vegetables, medicine. So this is where, in the back room, right there, was where my grandfather slept. And this is a picture, a clip in 1912 showing the store of my grandfather, Moy Chung, in 1912. He moved on to Cambridge Central Square in Boston Chinatown for about 4 years, chop suey. And you know what chop suey is? That is the most delicious Cantonese dishes you can have, because most of the sojourners from China came from Siam. And this is the Cantonese style of cooking and eating. And it got very popular with the American society in the early 20th century. And my grandfather owned a restaurant. He was a partner called the Boston Chinatown. In Boston Chinatown, it was called the Royal Restaurant on 16 Harrison Avenue. But because they had to cater to both to the American and Chinese market, they both served American food and Chinese food. But in particular, Thanksgiving dinner, this is an ad. They had turkey at a Chinese restaurant. And this is at the Royal Restaurant back then. Later, he owned another fancy restaurant in Central Square of Cambridge, which is between Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Harvard University. And on the second floor was the Imperial Restaurant. And you see the sign here, Imperial Restaurant, chop suey and American food. And it was a white linen table, high class, very refined place. After the Great Depression, he went to Los Angeles to live in Little Tokyo from 1936 to 1943. And Little Tokyo was near City Hall, about 3 or 4 blocks from Little Tokyo. Little Tokyo is a Japanese town, you can call it Nihimichi, a Japanese town. And he was a waiter because he had a cousin who owned this restaurant called the Yak Kun Lo Chop Suey Cafe. And you can see Chop Suey Cafe, chow mein, chop suey. And most of their customers were Nisei, or Japanese American descent. To the right, you see the clientele, mostly Japanese, because this is, again, Little Tokyo in California, in Los Angeles. Of course, of that life he lived, here's a story. Because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, women were kept away from men to come to America. They were either considered to be prostitutes or worse. They were not allowed to come. Or if they were either as wives of merchants or as students. But the pain my grandfather shared was from 1923 to 1966, he was separated from my grandmother for 43 years. And this is a song for my long lost lover. And this is the love between my grandfather and grandmother. Below a pearly moon, amid an edgy slit, teary roars of a thunderstorm awakened me. My dreamy mind aroused for a creamy plum blossom of Hui Ping. My dragging heart achingly weeps. Why can we not share our lives? Why may I not feel your lust? Why are you so far away from me across a Pacific sea? While my lonely dusts are so long, I would never adore another. I would never declare my farewell to you. I will save myself for my long lost lover. So this is a poetic tribute of my grandfather's love for my grandmother, separated for 43 years. Generation 5, Jim Sui Chong, my father, our quiet man. He was born in Hui Ping. To the left is our ancestral home in Yulongong, village of Dragon Hill, the 9th house on the 6th alley. He was born on December 26, 1922. To the left is the house. To the right, you see a picture of him in the middle next to his cousin around 1923. And you can tell back then, if you're rich, you always have a nice picture at the studio with a fantastic background, a set drawing or a painting in the back. And this was in 1922, my father. And he's the one wearing some kind of oversized napkin or bib. Because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, there were many ways that people were desperate to go to America. My father came here to America as a paper son. He had to have a paper father to sponsor him. In this case, it was Chong Kwok Hong, who was his paper father, who was actually his uncle. He claimed that my father was his son, and he brought him over in 1932. To the right is his grave in Massachusetts. He left on March 25th, 1932, from the port of Hong Kong. And what you see to the left is Hong Kong in 1932. And he took a steamboat from the Canadian Pacific, the White Empress of the Pacific, all across America, to America, across the Pacific. Across from Hong Kong to China, to Japan, to Canada, across from Vancouver to Montreal to Yarmouth. And from Yarmouth, he took a yacht or a smaller ship to arrive on Boston, the port of Boston, on April 20th, 1932. And because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, he had to have what we call a certificate of identity, that you were either a legal immigrant or a resident. You had to have this certificate of identity to carry all the time. And he arrived in 1932 to 1936 to stay with my grandfather, Raymond Chong. So he spent about 4 years attending the school. And here, to the right, as I highlight, you see it again, the iconic signs that says chop suey, and the Imperial Restaurant, you see here, chop suey. But because of the Great Depression, my grandfather had to leave the business, the restaurant business. So he went to Los Angeles with my father, left the Union Station from Boston, go across America to Chicago, to Los Angeles, to arrive in Union Station in Los Angeles in 1936, and stayed in a place called Little Tokyo. And what you see is City Hall in Los Angeles. And my father attended Belmont High School. And right here, you see him. This is an all-Chinese club around 1938, 1939. To the right is this picture in the yearbook in 1940. He later, during the course of the war, wanted to become an aircraft mechanic. So he spent a year trained to be an aircraft mechanic at the Curtiss Wright Technical Institute in Glendale for 1 year. And you can see he's among the few Chinese among the rest of the white Americans who were trained to be aircraft mechanics at that time. Because of World War II, there's a tremendous demand for both military and commercial transport. So he went to San Francisco in 1943 to 1950. And this is Grand Avenue. You can see again, chop suey. You see a picture, a sign that says China Clipper. So San Francisco was a happening place. It was a tourist spot. It was a glorified version of what China would look like to an American perspective. But and here you also had nightclubs, Shanghai Low, and all the assorted nightclubs, bars. So my father joined Pan American Airways. He was in the Naval Reserve from 1943 to 1945. He served the world famous China Clipper seaplane. And this is the crew of 11 all Chinese men who supported the China Clipper seaplane. Right here, as I highlight, is my father. This gentleman here in the hat is Li Liang, the crew chief. This man here was a young high school boy who later became an Air Force pilot who flew planes, jet fighter planes, during the Korean War. This man here, quite tall, strong. He was a football player at University of California, Berkeley, after the war. This is really an iconic picture. So my father was both working for Pan Am Airways as a mechanic, but also he was in the Naval Reserve. And you can see the uniform he had to wear, the hat, the jacket. He looked pretty handsome. And then in my mind, 1944, you see this picture here? This is a snapshot of him in Honolulu. And you can see him developing, being more confident as an American. And he, on his behalf, because he is a Chinese American veteran of World War II, I will get a replica of this gold medal that will honor the Chinese American who served during World War II, whether it's the Navy, the Army, Coast Guard, the Merchant Marines, the Marine Corps. My father was a World War II veteran. So after World War II, he got discharged on December 7, 1945. So what can he do? Can he become a mechanic, work for another airline, or do something else? Maybe laundry, maybe chop suey, maybe a dry goods store? No, he decided to get something more interesting. The Kubakan Theater Restaurant from 1946 to 1950 at 414 Grant Avenue. And you can see chop suey, the restaurant, the Kubakan. This is what the Kubakan looked like around 1945. And it was the golden age of the Chinese nightclub in San Francisco Chinatown from the late 30s to the early 1950s, where it was a place of fine foods, hard liquor, cigarette girls, photographer girls, fine dancing, fine entertainment. And at this particular restaurant was owned by Eddie Pan, who came from Macau, who owned the Kubakan Theater Restaurant. My father was a junior partner to that restaurant. The Kubakan at the gateway of Grant at Bush in Chinatown. And the menu, the theme was Kubakan. That was the recurring theme that Eddie Pan was promoting, because there were other similar nightclubs. The Forbidden City by Charlie Lowe in particular, world famous. And what you have here was combination, because you had to cater to both to the Chinese and American taste. To the left, you got the American menu. You got steaks for $2.50. You got New York cut steak. Wow. For $3, you got a full course meal. To the right, you got the Kubakan Deluxe. For $3, you get egg flour soup, chow mein, 8 full young. But you can see you get a whole variety of dishes, whether it's American or Chinese. Get a little flavor of that. This is from 1946 to 1950. And this is some classic pictures of what they're making chop suey in the kitchen. And then having parties, meetings at the Kubakan back in the 1940s. And of course, Eddie Pan, he was quite a character. He was the MC, he was the maitre d', he was the jack of all trades. And he was very entertaining. And their type of music was, the theme was Latin music. You can see how they were dressed, a lot of drums, a lot of different type of musical instruments. But it was pretty lively. 3 times a night, dances, 3 times a night, programs. The program, A Night in Chinatown, Kubakan, a new club. And this is a picture to the right. On opening day, October 1944, on Halloween, having 3 shows a night, all Chinese entertainers. And he got a program. This is what the program had. And again, Eddie Pan, cheerleading, spearheading the whole effort. You got the street singing, you got dancing, you got lullaby, hula dance, you got sing-song girls, China dancing sweetheart, the Oriental interlude, and the China Congo. So it was an entertainment program for 1 hour. You had comedy, you had dancing, you had singing, and for most of the guys, you had stripping. So it was a lively 3 times a night at 414 Grand Avenue at the Kubakan Theater Restaurant. And my father was part of the action. You see the exotic dancers in their tux. And below you see Eddie Pan hamming along with the rest of the entertainers with the exotic gowns. And you can see the mostly white American audience looking around. And my father, again, was a junior partner. You can see he was getting more confident. He was getting up there. I mean, he was considered a ladies' man, but he would not acknowledge that to me. But I know he was very popular in the ladies back then, in the late 40s, because of that confidence, of that comfort. He became a gentleman. He became well-polished, well-groomed. And you can see that little swag walking down in the streets of San Francisco back around 1946, 1950. So he became a true gentleman. And in my mind, that was the peak of his life, being a junior partner with Eddie Pond at the Kubicon Theater Restaurant from 1946 to 1950. But eventually, the nightclub business died out because people got raised families, and they got other things to do. So him, my father, and my grandfather went to New Chinatown from 1950 to 1955. And what you see is I believe it's called the East Gate. And you see is the central plaza of Los Angeles Chinatown that was built originally in 1938. It was a fantasy world for the American eyes and senses and ears, what a Chinatown should be or should be like. And this is where my father stayed from 1950 to 1955 for my grandfather. Because of his good skills he learned, he became a what we call an aircraft inspector for Lockheed California in Burbank. And this was the golden age of aviation in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. This was during the era of the Cold War, a lot of tension, many contracts building military cargo planes, jet fighters, bombers. So my father's had a 29-year career building mostly military planes like this P-3 Orion, an anti-submarine warfare airplane. But in addition to working 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, doing the graveyard shift, he worked Saturday and Sunday at our relative's restaurant called the Far East Cafe, or Anton Lo, in Cantonese from 1950 to 1954. And you can see again, the iconic neon sign that says Chop Suey. This is Little Tokyo. And this is at 347 East First Street. And this is during the parade, the August parade in Little Tokyo. And to the right are, again, the Japanese clients, the Nisei community. They love going to Far East Cafe, where my father was a waiter. And you had a type of chop suey, a Japanese style or flavor called China Mishi. It's a variation of chop suey that catered to the Japanese palate and the Japanese senses, like food that are well presented in color and in arrangement. So they call it China Mishi, a variation of chop suey. And this is the cook happily making China Mishi. And this is the menu of that. For $1, you can get a classic dish called ham ngoi for $1, or for 50 cents, you can have some chop suey. For $1, you can have chow mein. For $1, you can have almond chicken. So this was the menu back then, and during the 50s or so, at the Far East Cafe. But eventually, my father got tied down to a matchmaker to marry my mother, Sin Hoi Tong, from Santa Barbara. And this is a picture. They were married January 14, 1955. And they bought a house in Los Angeles in the Elysian Valley to the right. But below is there in front of the house at 2245 Gloria Place. What's that? A year later, I showed up. Number one son. To the left, is, of course, with mom. And to my right is dad. So I came along a year later. And shortly after that, a year later, number two son showed up. My brother, Michael. So as you might notice in those days, people like to take pictures in their front lawn. And we were both born, myself and my brother, at the French hospital. And our attendant physician who delivered us was Dr. Julius Su. He was known as the godfather of Los Angeles Chinatown. He delivered thousands of the Sioux babies from the 40s to the 70s. There were thousands of Sioux babies at the French hospital in Los Angeles Chinatown. And we live in the Elysian Valley along the Los Angeles River in a simple bungalow. And the neighborhood was known as Frogtown Riverside. Frogtown Riverside. And the reason it was called Frogtown was there was a horde of frogs that would saturate the whole landscape. So we were known that this part of town was called Frogtown. But this is where I live. I grew up as a kid in Los Angeles. And our world revolved, again, Los Angeles Chinatown. You see the East Gate right here. You see the Phoenix Bakery with their almond cookies, butterflies. Right here, Hong Kong Lo, the best Cantonese dishes on the second floor. I can always remember the sweet and sour pork. And to the left, way in the background, Lim's Cafe. I can always remember the beef wonton and the soda pop bottles, Coca-Cola in particular. Took family vacations to Victoria, to Grand Canyon with the family later. But his American dream for my father, Jim Sui Chong, was to ensure that I graduated and my brother graduated from college. That was his American dream. Nothing else mattered. That was the most important duty, responsibility that my father had for us, for the family. And he died in 1979. This is the last picture of him in 1979 with my father and mother. And I have a poem looking back up on my father, Our Quiet Man. Father, I love you. When I was a child, I never loved my father, nor I hated him as a son, for our talks were crisp and our times were lean. At the City of Angels, he meekly toiled away, as his words were stiff and his thoughts were dark. But he kept our family together. After a subliminal journey of my ancestor roots, I finally grasped his awesome life as a paper son from Hoi Ping to Gam Sum. I finally mused about him, a hardy pursuer of his dream, a devoted husband to his wife, a doting father for his two sons, our quiet man of calm dignity. While a frosty moon crests down the celestial sky, midst a surreal broad, in heartfelt affection, I say, Father, I love you. And this poem I did compose for him 30 years after he died in 2009. So this is something special from my heart to my father. Generation 6, me, Raymond Douglas Chong, Zheng Wei Ming. Number one son, me. And this is my life, going in the Elysian Valley, Frogtown, Riverside, going to public schools, Doris Place Elementary School to the left, famous for some movie scenes. To the right, in Glassell Park, I went to Irving Junior High School in Los Angeles. Went to Marshall High School in Los Angeles. And to the right is the iconic tower known for some famous movie scenes, because Marshall High School was very close to Hollywood. So we had many film crews making a lot of scenes at our high school at that time. I went to University of Southern California, USC, graduated in civil engineering, spent 4 years over there. And I was actually very blessed that my father could sponsor me to get to USC. At that time, all I knew was I had to go to USC, and that was it. And that was the expectation when I was growing up. And here are my credentials. I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from USC. I got my master's from San Jose State Civil Engineering. I'm a professional engineer, a professional traffic operation engineer, a professional transportation planner, road safety engineer, a certified public works professional, and I have other credentials, but okay, that's who I am from a technical perspective. This is my foundation, my baseline. This is who I am as a Chinese American here. And here, of course, this is my diplomas from USC and San Jose University. But I'm also a specially appointed professor at Shandong Jintong University in Jinan. And this was given to me back in 2014. Again, in Jinan at Shandong Jintong University. And I've been involved in my profession. I was the founding president of the Texas chapter of the International Chinese Professional Association for 2 years, from 2008 to 2010. And I did other things, a little bit non-professional, more creative. I was the chair at the very first Miss Oakland Chinatown pageant in 1988. And put it mildly, I had a great time. So this is my first venture into the community back in 1988. And this was the Oakland Chinatown Night Lions Club. At that time, it was a dazzling moment, never to be forgotten, on January 9th, 1988. In 1991, I became president of this community service organization called the Wasung Service Club, very involved, the preeminent Chinese American club in Oakland, in the East Bay of San Francisco. And that was a wonderful year in 1991. Later, I got involved in community service. I ran a nonprofit organization from 1991 to 2000, Oakland Asian Student Educational Services. I was the board president for those 10 years. And in the picture in the middle was YQ Lee, our executive director. And we were very involved in many programs, in tutoring, mentoring, training for kids in Oakland, Chinatown, kids from China, South Asian kids. And we groomed them with the help of students from University of California at Berkeley. And many of these, this is 20, 30 years ago, many of them now are doctors, professors, lawyers, engineers. So that was my part, to inspire others to follow their American dream as the first immigrants to come to America for them. So I was helping them follow the successful route to be part of the American dream. Then behold, later, 1998, Kinji Kyle Chong, my #1 son, my only son, but I call him my #1 son, my pride and joy. I later become, for 2 years, the president of the Ventura County Chinese American Association in Camarillo in California on the Gold Coast near Santa Barbara, northwest of Los Angeles. And it's a fun time too, to meet different Chinese Americans. But the turning point to where I'm here right now in front of you was a dear friend, John Thomas Killip, on January 30th, 2003, a Marine, a corporal Marine who fought during the Vietnam War, became best friends. On January 30th, 2003, on a Thursday, in a bungalow in Monterey, city Monterey, California, he was very despondent, very depressed. He had divorced his wife, a business failure. He put himself in the bathtub, took a handgun, and killed himself. So from that moment, January 30th, 2003 has been a paradigm shift. I was thinking of the American dream. I came inward to find my roots, both in America and China, looking from my forefathers here and back to China. This was a turning point, a paradigm shift for me. And I learned in the past 18 years an awesome odyssey of my roots, both in America and China. And on November 21st, 2007, I returned as a fallen leaf to represent my father, who had left the village in 1932. I came back to the village, Yonglongong, village of Dragon Hill, to represent him. And it was an amazing sight when we rolled in with the Toyota vans into the plaza. People jumped out of the ancestral hall and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And we said, we're from America. And then when we talked a little bit more, he said, "Hey, we've been waiting for you for 75 years. Where you been?" And he showed us to the ancestral hall, and to the ancestral home. And this picture here is right here. That's me. And you see these 5 elders. And inside, in the ancestral hall, was the classroom where my father learned how to be a good student. This space, this is the room where he learned, and these are his classmates in 1932. And this gentleman here was his best friend, my dear friend. Fast forward to the next year, October 26, 2008, there was a reunion with an unknown family I didn't know about, a second family by my great-grandfather, and we had a reunion in San Francisco, Chinatown. But at the same time, I was given a box, a steel box. That steel box represents a fabulous find. In 1950, my father had left the steel box for my aunt. It sat there at her house. She died. Fast forward 58 years later, my cousin said, "Hey, Ray, it's a steel box your father left in 1950. And this is the very same day I had that reunion. And when I opened, I found treasures of his life from 1944 to 1950 in San Francisco. So when I opened that box and I saw those pictures, I cried because I felt the presence of my father on that day, that evening. Fast forward a year later, Qingming, May 8, 2009, at the Hill of the Flying Swan, the Hill of the Flying Swan. I pay respect to my forefathers with 7 tombs. And you can see the tombs. Among those are buried are my forefathers from the sojourners. Chun Xinzheng, my great-great-grandfather, the gold miner. Bun Yun Chung, my great-great-grandfather, the railroad worker. Hoi Ling Chung, my great-grandfather, the gambling and opium merchant. And this is very symbolic. It was such a memorable early summer of May 8, 2009. I can remember the black butterflies, the fragrance in the air, the moment that when I paid respect. At the same time, another miracle happened that same day. At that very moment, to the right, at my ancestral hall, before this, paying respect to my forefathers, was another family who had heard about me from Hong Kong. And they came from another part on my family tree, and they rushed over. And this was the moment when I first met them on that same day, May 8th, 2009. And from that point, I became a different persona, different guys. I became a writer. I became writing stories about my family roots. I wrote stories about a famous jet fighter pilot. I wrote poems. I got this book, More Mystic Poetry. I contribute to poems to a Canton Cutie, a magazine. I became a lyricist for a band called More Mystique to the left. And I have my own album, Village of Dragon Hill, a mystical journey in passion. I also became an editor, writer for this book with my fellow professors to write this book about, of course, chop suey and sushi from sea to shining sea. And filmmaker, a documentary, My Odyssey Between Two Worlds, with my good friend Alvin Wright. And it talks about my return to the village, Yulongong, my return to the village as a fallen leaf, and back to America, my family history. So this has been a period of transformation, a paradigm shift in my life. Not the American dream, but looking inward to my heart and soul as a Chinese American. And also, I'm a journalist for ASM News, writing investigative reports, things like that. So I find I'm fully engaged. I'm engaged with the community, the society, both from a Chinese perspective and an American perspective. And I have a website called Chinese Love Poetry, from all my writing, my literature, my articles, my videos, and so forth. Chinese Love Poetry. But I'm looking forward to Generation 7, my #1 son, Kinji Kao Chong. And that's where I have my dreams, my hopes, my aspirations, my inspiration that he can carry on for myself to our respective forefathers on Gold Mountain and Gumsum. And he is a Longhorn at University of Texas at Austin, Longhorn. He graduated in radio and television film. And I'm proud of he graduated on time and doing well at the age of 22. He has his own company called KKC Visuals, do videos, photography, production. He does a lot of filming on site, live, in Hollywood too, and doing many things. And he is the multimedia director for this rising pop star named Kishi, who is a Vietnamese American who was born in Houston, actually lives in Sugar Land, Texas. So my son is carrying forward the torch for myself, for my forefathers, our forefathers, for the Yang Planet Odyssey on Gold Mountain. And he has done videos with Kishi Blue in the month since that this new video had been posted. He has over 1 million hits, so he's getting some buzz. I'm really happy for his heading to the right path of success. And my China roots have been a great resource in finding my roots, principally in China, exploring the Gazette, the whole history of my village from 1506 to now, since the beginning of the Qing Dynasty, to the Republic of China, People's Republic of China, to the Cultural Revolution, and so forth. My China has been a wonderful resource in finding my roots in China. And this is what they can do. I'm very associated with them. I'm proud of their work. And you see the picture to the left is my village, of course. And all the different things they do. Wonderful work. Just want to give a little promo for them. But that concludes my presentations. I'm open to questions. So I can go on. You can go on mute right now for a Q&A, sir.